Two offers to buy your company can have the same exact price, but have very different outcomes in terms of how much cash you actually receive and what your life looks like over the next few years. We've worked with over 100 different companies selling here at Hillview Partners. We've sold over $1 billion worth of transactions. And I can tell you, when we see an offer, whether it's an indication of interest, a letter of intent from a potential buyer for one of our clients, it's the same four things we always look for. It's the same four things that we always set up in a matrix to compare apples to apples to see, is this really a good deal or a bad deal? I'm Arthur Petropoulos, the president and managing partner here at Hillview Partners. We're a middle market investment banking firm helping companies generating $20 million a year in pre-tax earnings or EBITDA sell their companies into secure capital. So you receive an offer to buy your company, whether it's solicited, unsolicited, strategic, financial, they're always going to look generally the same. And there's four things you want to look for. First of these is going to be the value. The value is kind of the wrapper, if you will, or the headline that you're going to see. Now, again, like anything in life, you cannot judge a book by its cover, but it has a cover nonetheless. Therefore, you would want to look for the price for the company. And that's the simplest concept, too, if we're going to pay X dollars for your business. Now, two things I will say is that in some situations, they will say that the value is a fixed number. We will pay you $30 million for your company. In other situations, it will be communicated to you as a multiple of EBITDA, in a rare situation as a multiple of revenue, but they will say, we are going to pay you 7 times EBITDA for your company, which equates to an enterprise value of $30 million. Now, the trick there sometimes is that if during diligence they determine that EBITDA is something different, then they're going to very mechanically change the price, whereas if someone tells you a specific price they're going to pay for your company, EBITDA variance has to be a little bit more material before they start changing that number. But that's a generality, and for the most part, the value is going to be a fairly readily understood variable. Second variable, though, is when you start to get into the weeds, when you start to get into the details, is structure. Think of the structure of a deal, of someone's going to pay you $30 million. How much of it is at closing? How much of it is over time? That's the first layer. So you say, okay, in a good situation, again, for a situation where we are trying to monetize to the greatest amount, we could have 100%. In many situations, we see 90%. In many situations, we see 80%. We don't like it to get under 80% if the objective is to monetize, unless we have high confidence in the second part of it. So layer one is what's at closing, what's over time. Layer two is for the things that are over time, what is the structure? What's the complexion? What is the composition of it? And generally speaking, that will take 3 shapes. First being an earnout, second being a seller note, and the third being a rollover. And so the idea of an earnout is that certain things must happen for you to earn the balance of the purchase price. And sometimes that can be a target of revenue. Sometimes that can be a target of profit. Sometimes that can be the retention of certain customers. Sometimes it can be the conversion of certain customers. Think in a software business where people paying a license, converting them to a subscription. Now think of a one-off home services company converting people from, hey, call us up when you need your gutters cleaned, to a annual gutter subscription. Different variables. But the earnout idea is that certain things must happen. You must earn the balance of the value. Now, in a situation where a client is saying, well, I'm selling the business and I want to go away and do something else, how could I be held contingent for certain things after I don't control it? That's a good question. That's a question we pose. It's the reason why we don't like earnouts in most situations, because there has to be a certain locus of control for our client in order to dictate or optimize the probability that we're actually going to succeed. Situations that we see where earnouts are more acceptable are where they say, okay, if these things happen in terms of revenues, we like revenues, right? People can stuff things into expenses, and therefore profit earnouts are a little bit more difficult. Revenue earnouts in terms of sales, that's something that's a little bit more controllable. So if a client of ours is staying for a year in a similar capacity that they are, and the earnout is for the revenue for that year, it could be more palatable. Again, we should tend to Blindfolded, if someone said, do you want an earnout? We'd say no, but we will see the ins and outs to see how much it may enhance the overall value. Second is the seller note. Seller note is like debt, basically. You can think of you as the seller as holding a note, holding paper, allowing the buyer to pay you over time for some portion of the business. Now, that brings with it some considerations that are you still going to have a vested interest in the business doing well? Yes, because a lot of times that's going to be paid at the cash flow. Now, you could say that you want the seller note to be guaranteed by the buyer, and we're oftentimes able to do that. However, the buyer is generally personally guaranteed on any loans that they need to buy the company. And so seller notes, again, you're loaning money, if you will, or taking money over time. Therefore, the borrower's quality and capabilities are highly important. So if it's a very large multinational strategic company that's going to buy you, and Dow Chemical wants to buy your business, or DuPont, or BASF, you can rest assured that the risk of your seller note is going to be comparable to the bonds that they issue in the market. Now, if it's Larry the cable guy or someone down the street that wants to buy your business, and I've only gone bankrupt twice, it wasn't even my fault, and I'll pay you this, promise, I'll be good for it over the next 7 years. It was Wimpy from the old cartoons, if you give me a cheeseburger today. Those things we're going to have a little less confidence with. So with a seller note, you're looking not so much on your control of the business as much as the quality of the borrower or the person asking you to hold that note. The third is rollover equity. That's basically taking some portion of your ownership of your company and owning part of the post-transaction enterprise or entity. Now, question there is, I'm trading my ownership for ownership in something else. What's in that something else? What does it represent? What is it worth, and what are they going to do with it? Do I trust the forward stewardship of the business? Do I trust their strategic path? How do I not get diluted? These are all valued questions. And so in any situation where a rollover is a component of a transaction, we want to heavily evaluate what we're going to own and the quality and the enterprise value of the business that we're going to now own a part of. I will say, rollovers have performed very well. Now, if you vet the buyer of a business, if it's a lot of times where you see rollovers are in private equity backed portfolio companies, so well-funded, institutionally capitalized businesses. We've seen it in larger strategic situations. And so most of the time, rollover capital held, call it between 4 and 7 years, tends to be worth at least twice as much. And many times, 3, and we've seen up to 6, 7 times as much, depending on the performance of the company post-transaction. But they do tend to perform well. We just had a client I chatted with that we sold their business in 2023, and they got the most recent valuation of the entity that they now own a portion of, and that has more than doubled within 3 years, and that's going to outstrip much of the S&P or any other place you put the money. Now again, you don't want to, part of the selling of a business is to monetize what you own. Therefore, you're not going to feel comfortable about rolling over 70% of your business. But again, it's a twofold exercise. Quality of the person that's buying it and your confidence in their capabilities, as well as the quantity of how much is going to turn into cash when you sell and how much would be rolling over. The third variable is the transition. This goes hand in hand with structure. This is going to be how long you are expected to stay part of the business and in what capacity on a post-transaction basis. There are some companies we sell that you can just give someone the keys and walk away from. That's going to be dictated by the people, the process, the services that you have ingrained in your company, and we will try to make the case for that if that's the desire of our client. But in many cases, the most common outcome is a 1-year tapering transition. That's going to mean the seller is staying in their capacity as either a chairman emeritus or director of a company, but oftentimes they will be asked to stay on board for 3 to 6 months in their existing capacity, followed by a tapering capacity, meaning being available but spending less and less time, kind of the nits and grits of the business for the balance of the first year. Buyers will oftentimes want this to be longer and ask for 3, 4, 5 years. But again, I think one of the key objectives in selling a business is that we're not trying to turn your ownership into a job. Therefore, if the goal is getting to the next chapter of life, then the actual transition in spelling that out, what does it mean? What is the commitment? What are the responsibilities? What are the duties? And therefore, even if there is an involvement after the transaction, the things you want to do, you want to be the things that you actually like doing. So if you said, well, I really love client relationships, but I can't stand the administrative stuff, well, those things should stop the day of the closing. And if you have to be involved for some period post-transaction, that can be client relationships, business development, retaining those relationships. So transition is important, and it goes hand in hand with structure. To the extent a buyer wants to implement structure in a deal, you should have control. Therefore, if there is a transition period and there is a structured element to a deal, an earnout, a seller note to some degree, you'd want the timing of these things to align where you still have some level of involvement or control over the business. A rollover is a bit different because you're going to own shares in something, therefore it's likely to last into 4 to 7 years when the business is perhaps sold again or combined with other businesses. But nonetheless, the idea of the transition is it's something that is often overlooked in offers, and you need to really hone in on it to say, what are you asking me to do? For how long? At what level of intensity? And it needs to taper off. Because the idea that you could just keep working full throttle and then you hit a day and they say, okay, you're free, it's just not going to happen. You're going to get to that day, then they're going to say, oh, you know what, we just need a little more time, just a little more time. Therefore, you want to negotiate in the tapering so that at some point it just kind of slowly turns off and all these things are being handed off and delegated over time. The last consideration is stakeholders or employees. And so in the sale of a business, there are some buyers that want to keep all of your employees, administrative and producers. If you think of people within a company, you really break it down into 3 components. You call it the originators, the people that get business, they sell. The executioners, the people that do the stuff. And third are operational people, HR, payroll, accounting, controllers, bookkeepers, secretaries, all things like that. And so there are going to be some buyers that say, we want the originators and the execution people, but we don't want the admin. There's going to be people that say we want all 3. There's going to be people that say we just want sales. And again, it depends on the complexion of your business, the complexion of the buyers, how it's being positioned, but it's something that you want to think about before you get into the process. Now, the nice thing is that there are certain situations where if it's a larger buyer and they have a larger organization, everybody wants good people. That's kind of the general motif. And there's a lack of hireable people in many situations. Therefore, human capital in that sense is at a scarcity. Therefore, there's not going to be a lot of people that want to come in, Gordon Gekko style and just lay everybody off and slash and burn. But there will be companies that say we just don't have the need or desire for any of the back office. And you have to think whether that's something that you're comfortable with because it has to be part of a dialogue. Again, the purpose of all of this is not to go out to the market and dictate terms, but the purpose is when you have an offer that you're able to highlight these 4 key areas, crystallize or distill what it is that they're actually offering you, highlight the areas that are not clear, and then upon getting more of a clarification, being able to respond with a thoughtful counterpoint. These are the things that we would feel comfortable with relative to value, structure, transition, employees/stakeholders. And so this is the thought for today. When you are looking at an offer, you must read it in a way that you're looking for the key variables. Now, there's a bunch of other little things that go in these that are legal nits and grits that you want your banker to look at, you want your lawyer to look at, but at its core, an offer will be 4 things: value, structure, transition, stakeholders. For value, are they saying a raw number or are they illustrating it as a multiple of something? Structure, what's at closing, what's over time? For the stuff over time, is it earnout, seller note, rollover, or some mixture of all of it? Transition, how long, what intensity, how does it taper? Even if it is high intensity to begin with, you want it to taper. It's the only way to actually shut something off. It's very, very difficult to shut off a fire hose at full blast. I have not tried. And then number 4 is stakeholders. Do you want everybody to guaranteed be retained? Is it a little less important? The retention of good talent will always be mandated by the buyer, but there's always can be some slippage and something to think about. But that's the idea for today. 3 feet of snow, losing our voice. we still wanted to get this out there, and appreciate everyone's bearing with us. I hope the week's going well for everyone. Keep pushing forward. God bless. And we'll see everyone next time.